I bring you greetings from, what should I say, warm Arizona? We're a little warm there in several ways, as you know. And as I was listening to Gene and talking about, and Kurt talking about what's happening here in Missouri and how you're challenging the federal government. And you know we have our challenge in Arizona with the federal government. And anyway, I'm just so grateful to be here and to share with you an incredible message. A message that gives hope to people. And several of these are going on right today. Of course, not like this. I'm just so grateful to be invited to Branson. Grateful for Fred and Linda Wagner and Gene and others, and particularly the Hughes brothers, who gave up their time this day to invite us to come and to share this incredible message. So if you're ready to learn today, you know, I hope each one of you has a study guide. You have one of our study guides? And because if you just sit here and listen to me, I think you'd find it interesting. But if that's all you did, guess how much you'd remember in a couple of weeks? People who do these kind of studies say, not very much. You might think that was good, but okay, tell me about it. Probably about 2 to 5% is all people can remember after 2 weeks. If you don't believe me, tell me what that great sermon was in church 2 weeks ago. Huh? Remember that? How great it was? Tell me the details. I don't know, but it was sure good. See the point? So students know if you want to remember things, what do you have to do? You got to write it down. We're going to be imparting a lot of information to you today. I don't want you to get writer's cramp. So guess what we did? Have you noticed? All of your what? All of your notes in beautiful sentence outline form so you can read them when you get home. And so 2 weeks from today, if you say, listen, now, what was that point he made? And you look back in your notes and review it a little bit. Oh, yeah, that's what it was. You can remember up to 75% of what we talked about today, if you do it that way. And it's a way of imparting a lot of information in a short period of time. And have you noticed we haven't given you all of your notes? Have you noticed in our little book? What have we left?
Blanks.
Little blanks. You know what that's for? Yeah, that's to make sure you keep right with me as we move through the material. So you don't have to write very much, but just a little, every once in a while I'll say, now that's the blank for letter A, and you'll look down and just write it in. It's a great way of imparting a lot of information in a short period. So I want you to think of today as walking with the founder. That's what we're going to do. We bring our students. I own and operate a charter high school in Mesa, Arizona, and every year we bring our students, 11th and 12th grade students, back east to tours, to have history tours, and every 2 years we go to Boston. Been to Boston? How many have been to Boston? When you were in Boston, did you walk the Freedom Trail? How many of you walked the Freedom Trail of Boston? Okay, a few of us have. And for those who haven't, it's a red painted stripe on the sidewalk. It leads you down through old Boston. And you talk about and see about 15 or 16 different places there that have historical significance. You can review about 300 years of American history in about a half a day. It's a marvelous place. One of the first places you come to is called the Old Granary Cemetery. And this is a cemetery, needless to say, it's quite old. The headstones are weather-worn and dilapidated. And you walk in this little cemetery, of course, it's surrounded now by high-rise buildings. And one of the first places of note that you come to, one of the first graves, is the grave of John Hancock. Remember him? He tells stories about John Hancock. Then the next one you come to of note is the grave of Paul Revere. And you know about him. Then there's a whole family of headstones. This is the Goose family in colonial America. Anybody ever heard of the Goose family? There's one particular one. Her name is Mary Elizabeth Goose. You heard of her? Mary Elizabeth? Yes, you have. You know her as Mother Goose. Mother, here she is. You know, that was a real person, but somebody had to write those little things to memorize. There she is. And you walk a little bit farther, and here's the grave of Samuel Adams. father of the American Revolution. That's just all in one stop on the Freedom Trail. See what I'm talking about? And another stop I like to make, now you're into the financial district of Boston. What are buildings like in financial districts of these big cities? Right, they're tall skyscrapers. And nestled among these big skyscrapers is a little church. And it's called Old South. Old South Church. We take our students in there and sit them down on the first few pews. And after the docent talks about the building and so forth, and I say, now I'd like to talk to my students. And I review with them a couple of things that happened in that building. One of which is when Samuel Adams and brought his young Sons of Liberty into that building on the evening of the 19th day and said, we cannot let those ships stay loaded down in the harbor, which is only 2 blocks away. One more day. If we do, we'll lose. What's he talking about? Well, one of the ways to protest the colonists had was to refuse to unload British ships in all the ports. And most of the British ships, after sitting there loaded, would just turn back and go home, back to Britain, but not in Boston. Governor Hutchinson wouldn't let them return. Matter of fact, he had a rule. He says, if a ship is not unloaded within 20 days, my officers can go on that ship with their soldiers, confiscate the cargo, bring it on shore, and sell it for whatever they can get with the tax attached. 20 days. So here Sam Adams is in the Old South on the evening of the 19th day, and he said, we cannot let those ships stay loaded one more day. So what did they do? They went down and unloaded the ships. Little unconventional way, right? We call it the Boston Tea Party. It was no party. This was direct confrontation with the king. All that happened in Old South, the Old South Church. And there's another little story I love to tell that used to be in history books, but it's not there anymore. This is back during the French and Indian War, when the French were our enemies, and the French had been given orders, the French fleet, to come up and burn the coastal cities of the colonists. Charleston was to be burned, New York was to be burned, Boston was to be burned. But what defense did we have as colonists? What was our defense? Did we have a nice navy where we could go out and intercept the French fleet? No. Did we have nice artillery pieces that could launch and projectiles and sink ships? No. What was our defense? It was the defense we always turned to when we were desperate. And so they declared a day of fasting and prayer and turned to God and said, would you all please come to Old South, which was the largest gathering place in Boston at that time, in a spirit of fasting and prayer on a given day. And it was a beautiful, clear day in Boston when this day arrived. And it was the Reverend Thomas Prince whose turn it was to officiate that day. And so as the people gathered, he welcomed them. He got onto the podium. He used to let me stand on the podium to tell this story. And he welcomed them in, standing room only, all gathered in a spirit of fasting and prayer. He welcomes the group, and then he said, now let us pray. He begins to pray. And the record says it was a very long prayer. Oh God, we need thy help. Sink those frigates to the bottom of the sea, oh God. Was his request. And he goes on and he explains to God the problem, as though you have to do that, right? That's what you do when you're desperate, so that you know he knows you know what's going on, right? And he went on and on. All of a sudden he pauses in his prayer because the room was beginning to darken. And the windows up above begin to rattle. And the bell up in the belfry begins to bong irregularly. And the sexton said later, it wasn't me, I wasn't pulling the rope. That was the wind. Something was happening outside. And Reverend Prince pauses and takes all this in, raises his hands and says, oh God, we hear thee, we hear thee. Thou hast answered our prayer. Thou hast sunk those frigates to the bottom of the sea, O God. But do you have a nice cell phone to let them know they're going down? No, he didn't have that. He just felt like this was an answer to their prayer. And do you know, a little over a week later, they got word that on that very day they were assembled in Old South, a storm that suddenly arose out of the Atlantic and had sunk nearly every one of those ships. Nearly every one. A few that were left hobbled on back to the West Indies. The colonists once again had been saved. That's only one of dozens of stories we could tell that used to be told to young people in our schools. They're cheating our young people. But I tell you that story, and of course I can tell you other events on the Freedom Trail. I want you to think of today as walking a Freedom Trail with the founders. We are going to discover how they discovered these principles that have been talked about here. We're going to discover with them. So if you're ready to walk a Freedom Trail, let's get started. We're on page 5, lesson 1 here. And I'm going to try to keep my eye on the clock to make sure I'm within my time. So we may skip around a little bit. But, first of all, if you study the history of governments in the world, you come to conclude there really are only 2 kinds of governments. Now these have technical names which we could mention, but they're hard to remember. We've given them very easy names to remember. How about these? There's ruler's law and there's people's law. Those are easy to remember, aren't they? And if you study the history of nations, you can kind of categorize ruler's law and people's law. Who do you think makes the law under ruler's law? A ruler. The ruler. Who makes or accepts the law under people's law? The people. And when I teach American history to young people, I like to say, okay, does that act of that president or that act passed by Congress lead us more to ruler's law or people's law? So you do that? You get these young people geared to thinking that way, all of a sudden current events, boy, they click in and they go, that's ruler's law. That's ruler's law. Or that's people's law. That's good. So you can do that? So let me ask you this. After Columbus came, what was the first major nation to make inroads into the New World? First nation? Spain? The Spanish, right? What kind of law did the Spanish bring? Ruler's law, no question. Then they were blunted by another major nation. Who was that? France. What kind of law did the French bring? They brought ruler's law. And you got one ruler's law butting up against the head of another, leaving a nice little pocket on the East Coast for a different people, with a different kind of law at least written in their hearts. These were the English. You realize by the time the Declaration was written, there were about 3 million English colonists in America. Now, if you look down on page 5, that's your first blank under Roman numeral 1 is rulers and people. Did you get that just above the map? Rulers' law and people's law. And the next blank under the map there is 3 million colonists in America. And they brought with them elements of people's law, which is your blank at the end. And you say, where do they get that people's law from? Well, on the top of the next page, their ancestors were known as Anglo-Saxons. Anglo-Saxons, which is your blank, who came into Britain about 450 AD, set up a wonderful system of government that the founders studied in depth. And it lasted about 600 years until that tragic book date of history, 1066. Who can tell us what happened in 1066? Battle of Hastings, the Norman Conquest, William the Conqueror came over and conquered the Anglo-Saxon people and corrupted their form of government, and that's your blank for letter B, corrupted. Are we all there now? And there's a quote in letter C by Jefferson. We won't take time to read that. You can do that, explaining this situation. And so you have now the Saxon people being ruled by Norman kings. And this is quite an amazing century after century battle going on. Saxon people against Norman kings. We have classics written of those time periods when the Saxon people are trying to get their rights back. Can you name some of those classical novels and historical fiction, so forth, about Robin Hood, about Ivanhoe? I mean, this is classic struggle between the Saxon people and the Norman kings. And about 150 years later, in 1215, the Saxons said, maybe we need to take a big chart and write some of our rights down on it and take it to the king so that he will know what our rights are and he'll respect them. See, this was one of the problems with Anglo-Saxon law. It wasn't written down. So guess what? One of the first things our founding fathers learned. If you're going to preserve something, the best way to do it is to write it down. Do you know how many nations there are in the world today? About. Changes every year. About 200. About 200. Do you know how many of them actually have written constitutions? What would you guess? 10, 20, 30, like 40? You'll be as surprised as I was. At last count, 125 have written constitutions. Guess which is the oldest? Ours. One of the youngest countries has the oldest written constitution. This is one of the things the founders learned. You want to preserve it, you write it down. So they started writing. They started writing. And it's kind of amazing. You know, they took what do we call this big chart that the Saxons did? What do we call it? The Magna Carta. And of course, they took it to King John, even though he signed it, he didn't really honor it. So what they do? Later that century, they said, maybe we need to send some of our best people up to be with the king as he administers the government, to remind him of the rights of the people. This is the first Parliament. That's your blank for letter E, Parliament. Did you get your blank for letter D, Magna Carta? Okay, Magna Carta and Parliament. And that's about the way it stayed for several centuries. And in the sixth letter F, in the 1600s, Sir Edward Coke, he was an English judge. It's pronounced Cook, spelled Coke. But he began later in his life of ruling from the bench. These human rights belong to all people, not just the nobles and the kings and the aristocrats. They belong to everybody. Sir Edward Coke was a favorite author read by the founding fathers of our country on his equality of mankind. Sir Edward Coke. They belong to all freemen, which is your blank at the end of letter F. Then in 1628, Charles I was so harsh, Parliament forced him to sign, here's another document, the Petition of Rights. Petition of Rights. And which he did, but of course he was later convicted of treason, of violating the rights of the people, and what? Who knows what happened with Charles I? He was beheaded. These are dangerous times for English kings. And letter H, and he was followed by Charles II, and he was followed by James II, who was so bad he was overthrown in the Glorious Revolution. And they said, no one can ascend to the throne of England unless they sign, here's another document, letter H, on page 7, unless they sign the English Bill of Rights. Okay, I've taken you through a very quick history of England to point out some things. First of all, people lost their freedom in 1066. And then what did they do over the centuries to try to restore them? They wrote documents, they wrote petitions. You see this happening? Century after century after century. Let me ask you, did it ever really fully work for them to get it back? It didn't. It didn't. So what did they have to do? What did they have to do? They had to come to a new land, didn't they? Come to a new land. I have some bad news for you today. Guess what there isn't any more of? There's no new land. We're here. How many of us have roots, family roots in England? Do you know your family roots? Oh, look at this. See, most of us do. What do you think your ancestors would be saying to you if they could speak to us? Would they have a message for us? What would it be? Don't let happen to you what happened to us. Because if you do, it will be extremely difficult to get it done. I don't know about you, but I've got family roots there, and I am so grateful for them who stood, who were tortured, who were imprisoned, who were murdered, trying to get their rights restored. And now here we are. As tough as it may seem today, I'm sure glad I live today and not back then. I just think we owe them a debt of gratitude. But they set for us an example, and our founders took note of this example. And in an amazing way. So let's talk about the English experience here. What was the first permanent English settlement in America? Who knows that? Jamestown. What year? Right there in letter B on page 7. In 1607, Jamestown. Do you know when the people came to Jamestown? Before they came, actually, they had to be funded. And so they were funded by a group of London businessmen who said to them, now when you get over there, we tried it a couple of times and it hasn't worked, hasn't held. So we're going to give you some rules to follow, and here are the rules. Number 1, no one will own private property. We don't want any of this dog-eat-dog going after and scattering. No, nobody will own private property. Actually, you will live in a commune, and you will have a leader, and he will give you your assignments as to what to do. And if you do it that way, you'll survive. You like that system? You don't? Live in a commune, no private property, do what you're told? What does that sound like? Yeah, that's a communism form of government. That's your blank for letter B. It's secular communism. Anybody know what happened to Jamestown? They practically died out, didn't they? If it hadn't been for them breaking out of the system, they would have died out. But they eventually survived. That's why they're the first permanent English settlement. And we know a whole lot more now about the next group who came in 1620. Do you know that they were financed by basically the same group of people who said to them, you can make these same rules work because you are Christians. The Pilgrims, 1620, the Pilgrims, right? You can make, because Christians believe in brotherly love and having all things in common, and you can make these rules work. No private property, you'll have a leader, you'll give you your assignments. What do you think? Kind of a Christian communism, if there were such a thing, right? And so, okay, they agree. They come over here. We're so indebted to the leader, one of their leaders, Governor William Bradford, because he took meticulous notes of this whole experiment. You can read them today, called The History of Plymouth Plantation. And that's why Governor Bradford is known as the father of American history, because he took good notes. And you can read it today. And the story that I'm going to tell you. So they get over here, and he said, okay, we assigned everybody the task. There's fields to cultivate, there's food to cook, children to tend, clothes to wash. Everybody had their assignment, and then he said, in essence, okay, let's go to work. I see we have some experienced moms out here with us today. Mom, how did that work in your home? I know you made a chore chart, right? Everybody had their assignment. Huh? Did it work? Uh-oh. See? What happens? Worked for a while, and then what? Yeah, all these excuses. And this is what Bradford said. He doesn't list the excuses, but you can just imagine. Oh, I got a sore back, or got an ingrown toenail, or a sore elbow. It doesn't matter what the excuse is. Can't do the work. Do you mind if I not go out and do the work? And the work wasn't getting done. And as you may know, they had some pretty skimpy harvests those first few years. So after a while, Bradford said, he gets all the men together and he says, brother, this isn't working. Furthermore, he said, we came over from England to get away from tyranny, and you're making me a tyrant because I have to go and make you do your work. He said, I'm not going to be a tyrant anymore. We're going to change the system. So he divided up all the land by the size of families. And the seed corn and the tools, divided it all up. And then he said, in essence, brethren, from here on out, it's root, hog, or die. Whoa, that would be tough medicine today, wouldn't it? I mean, we're going to die anyway if we don't do something, so good luck. So he goes out into his part of the field the next season to work it. And he can hardly believe what he sees. And he writes about it. We're on the bottom of page 7. This quote from Bradford. See this? Actually, let's go to the top of page 8. Next to the picture there, he said, this had very good success, this new system, for it made all hands very industrious. So as much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been. Now this is Old English, this is before Webster, okay? The women now went willingly into the field and took their little ones with them to set corn, which before would allege weakness and inability, whom to have compelled would have been thought great tyranny and oppression. What's he saying here? It's working. What's working? The people are out there producing, they're working, and I'm not making them do. I don't have to make them do. How do you know human nature like he does? What was the difference? Huh? They knew that if they put their work into something, when they got the results, nobody was going to come along and take it and redistribute it. You've heard that word lately, haven't you? And redistribute it to everybody. He says, this is amazing what's happening. They're all out there. See, that's human nature, isn't it? And most people will respond. This is a great lesson. And this is written right in his history of Plymouth Plantation. So guess what our founding fathers wrote down? Don't ever do that other system. Don't ever do that. Don't ever take from the people the results of their labors. Don't ever redistribute it. They actually use those words. They call it leveling also. Don't ever level. As a matter of fact, Samuel Adams said leveling, taking from those who have and giving to those who have not, is, and this is his word, unconstitutional in our system. That's Samuel Adams. And these are great lessons of history. And so, from 1607 in Jamestown until the founders wrote the Constitution, in what year? Constitution? 1787. 1607 to 1787. Now, where's my math majors? How many years is that? The years? Figure that out real quick. 180 years. I like to call that 180 years of trial and error. Where some of the things they tried worked, and so they said, do this, do this. Some of the things they tried didn't work. Don't ever do this, don't ever do this. This is in their writings, folks. And it's amazing what's there. I'll just give you another example. Did you know that they actually tried to let the general government, that's what they used to call the national government, the general government, tax people based on their incomes? What do you think they found out? It's miserable. You can't enforce it without getting into the private affairs of people. Don't ever do, they wrote it down, don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. Matter of fact, they felt so strongly about that, when they wrote the Constitution, they put a prohibition of that kind of tax right into the Constitution. Did you know that? I'll show you that this afternoon. What are we doing to ourselves? See, they already tried these things. All of a sudden, somebody comes along around 1913 and says, ooh, here's a new way to raise money. This is a new idea. It's not a new idea. It's only a bad old idea. But if you haven't read the founders, you'd never know it. This is so incredible. They gave us advice on so many different issues. You would think they were alive today. Amazing. We'll talk about some of those things. Let me ask you this question, folks. When they came to Jamestown, what were they using to plow their fields with? Jamestown? Just a stick plow, maybe a little piece of metal on the end, stick plow, pulled behind the ox. About the way people have been plowing their fields for over 5,000 years. Right? What was their transportation like? Transportation? Walking, animal power, ox carts. Their ships weren't even as large as some of the ancient ships. Not the way people have been getting around for over 5,000 years. How were they making their cloth? Hand loom, about the way they had been doing it for over 5,000 years. What are we saying? Up until Jamestown, there just hadn't been much human progress made. Through all these thousands of years, all of a sudden, you set the human spirit free. And particularly, when you write a constitution to protect the creativity, the innovations of people, and let them enjoy the benefits of their labors and protect that, what happens? What happens? In less than 200 years, we went from ox carts to where? Walking on the moon. In less than 200 years. In other words, these concepts that the founders wrote down and institutionalized in our Constitution took us farther in 200 years than mankind had gone in over 5,000 years. Hence, we call a discussion of those concepts the 5,000-year leap, because that's what happened. It was miraculous when you set the human spirit free and know how to protect that freedom. Well, the founders developed certain principles. I hope you love principles in your life. I'm not talking P-A-L-S necessarily. I'm talking P-L-E-S, right? For example, if I were to say to you 4 times 4 is 16, would you all agree with that? Ooh, that was quick. Boy, I didn't see anybody figure that out. You just knew it, didn't you? You just knew it. Why did you know it? Why? Because some wise teacher back in the, what was it? Third grade, she said? Okay, third grade. Said, if you'll memorize these little things, it'll be a blessing to you your whole life. Has it been? Yes. You don't have to think. I could stand up here and try to convince you that 4 times 4 is 13, and I wouldn't do a very good job, because you know it. How about 8 times 8 is 64? See how that works? 12 times 12 is 144. See? 13 times 13 is 169. Come on. Huh? What happened? Did I lose some of you? Oh. Anybody know that one? Sure. 169. Yeah, it is. Hey, folks, I'll never lie to you. I'm from out of town. I teach Sunday school. You too. It is. It's 169. 18 times 18 is 324. You know that one? Well, it is. I told you I'll never lie to you. It is. 39 times 39 is 2581. If I tell you it's true, would you believe me? Thank you. You will? Well, thank you for the confidence. But that's over 1,000 off. But I told you I'd never lie to you. I'm from out of town. I teach Sunday school. And unless you memorize your 39s, you wouldn't know that that's, or unless you do a quick way of doing it, that that's way off. I ask you folks, is this not what's happening in legislative halls all over this land? Where someone comes along and makes a grandiose proposal, sounds so good, sounds so compassionate. Let's see, 39 times 39, 81, 2581, that sounds good. And these proposals, oh, it sounds so compassionate. We'll take care of this group of people. We'll take care of this group of people. We all want to feel sorry for those who don't have and those who are hurting and so forth. Okay, now let's do it. And the founders are saying, it's the wrong answer. But if you don't know the right answer, you could fall for it. Even good people can fall for it, can't they? Isn't that what's happening? So what we need to do is to go back and say, okay, what are the principles? Now we call these little principles mathematics, multiplication tables. They're little principles of math. How would you like a set of principles for government? So when somebody comes along, running for one office or another and makes a grandiose proposal, you can say almost immediately whether it's right or wrong, true or false, good or bad. Would you like that? You actually have one right there in your hands on this little card. This is our business card. Each of you should have one of these. Were you given one of these as you came in? This is called the 5,000-year leap. And now you know what that means. And if you'll turn over on the back, here are the principles of liberty developed by the founders. And the founders said, any group of people who wants to have freedom, prosperity, and peace, if they will cling to these principles we have discovered, you can have any group, not just Americans, any group. And here they are. And we're going around this nation trying to get people to memorize these principles. I don't know, does that seem like a big task? Memorize these principles. See, if you're in my class at school, I teach seniors in high school government. If you're in my class, one of the things you have to do to get an A, just one of them, is to memorize these and stand up in front of the class and recite them. Oh, I tell you, we probably have some school teachers in here. You know, there's several things that happen in the classroom that really make it all worth it, and this is one of them. When a young 17, maybe 18-year-old can stand up in front of the class and recite these principles. We not only recite them, we spend a whole semester studying them. These kids know this. And when our legislature's in session, and they usually are, in session, I go down to the bill room at the Capitol and pick up a stack of bills, and I bring them back, hand out 2 or 3 bills to each student, and say, now your assignment for next week is to read the bill, try to figure out what it's doing. I know these kids are really experienced, so they do a pretty good job. And relate the bill to a principle. And then make a decision whether the bill violates or supports that principle. Now, this is another one of those times that makes it all worth it. I'm sitting here listening to these young kids evaluate real legislation in terms of principle. There is nothing like that, folks. There is nothing like that. So I just encourage you to memorize these. Let me just give you an example here. We can talk about any of these if you want. Look at number 1. The only reliable, by the way, do we need some of these passed out? Do you all have them? Anybody who doesn't have them? Have we got some more down here? They should be in your book somewhere, so let's get some more down here. And by the way, we bought a lot of these, so if you want a few more, we've got them out there. And our compliments. Look at the very first one. The only reliable basis for sound government and just human relations is natural law. Is what? Natural law. You go out there and walk up, ask almost anybody on the street, tell me about natural law. They know what I'm talking about. Did you know you couldn't get out of Princeton or Harvard in the days of the founders without studying natural law? What in the world is that? And they love to read Cicero of Rome. They love to read Blackstone, the great English jurist. Our founders love to read them on this subject of natural law. What is it? And I love Blackstone's definition, and I'm paraphrasing it somewhat. He said, natural law is the order in which the Creator made everything to work properly. In other words, it's the way things are. It's truth. And if you form a government according to that, it will succeed. Amazing. Okay, Blackstone says there's 2 kinds of natural law. One he called cosmic law. That's a scientific law. That's law that if you can invent these concepts of science, what can you have? Nice what? Electricity, lights, microphones, computers, jet airplanes, televisions. I mean, if you can discover, this is all natural law. This is cosmic law, Blackstone says. But Blackstone says, don't forget the other kind of natural law, which is just as important. And he called it, these are his words, revealed law. What would that be? These are laws that the Creator laid down for the happiness of mankind. And He didn't let us fumble around and discover them. He gave them to us right from the beginning. Can you think of some in society? Don't kill. That doesn't lead to happiness. Don't kill. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Don't lie. Don't covet your neighbor's property. Go out and earn your own. This is all natural law, as Blackstone outlined. And if you live by these laws and build them into your society and into your governments and into your laws, you will be a happy and a prosperous people. Isn't that amazing? This is all the founders. So you create a government that says, okay, nobody's going to own private property, and when people work, we're going to take it from them and distribute it to everybody so everybody feels good and so forth. I ask you, what natural law does that break? Thou shalt not steal. That's very good. Yeah. Whatsoever ye sow, so shall ye also reap. That's natural law. Our Constitution is filled with natural law concepts. Separation of powers, checks and balances. I mean, you just go through it. It's amazing. If you build your government on natural law, it will succeed. So let's say the legislature of Missouri up in Jefferson City passes a law and says there's no more gravity in Missouri. There isn't? No. Legislature said there wasn't. Oh, that's great. Well, let's get on the high, you got a tower over here somewhere here in Branson. Let's get up there because this is going to be exciting. We're going to test this out. You first. And the founders said, even if a legislature passes a law, again, if it's against natural law, it is null and void from the beginning. It is no law. Isn't that amazing? That's the first thing people need to know is natural law. The law of nature and of nature's God, as Jefferson wrote in the Declaration. Anyway, so you know what will happen if you memorize these principles, folks? We have an election year, right? You're out working in your garden, and you got these memorized. Your neighbor will come up to you and say, "Hey, what do you think about the proposal so-and-so who's running for Congress or for whatever office made the other day?" And you'll put down your hoe and you'll say, "Let me tell you about the principle behind it." And you'll quote a principle. Maybe, let's say, maybe principle number 7 on your card. The proper role of government is to protect equal rights, not provide equal things. And you might have to say, that's why that proposal that he made the other day is dangerous, because it violates one of the most basic principles of good government. Or you might be able to say, that's why that's right on, because it supports a true principle of good government. You know what your neighbor will do? He'll look at you and say, "Wow, you're smart. Where did you learn that?" Well, just memorized a few things. So you got to be real humble when you know this much, right? This isn't much to know, folks. But it's more than most people know. And all of a sudden, you become an expert. And people will call you up. See, this is what we need. We need lots of teachers. People will call you up for advice, particularly right before the election, right? Oh, there's a lot of propositions on the ballot, a lot of candidates. I haven't had the time to study, but I know you have. Can you just kind of tell me how you think? See, we need thousands of people teaching correct principles. And you can all do it. We put it on a nice little card so you can put it in your coat or somewhere. And when you're out on one of your beautiful drives around here, you pull it out and you say, "Dear, what's principle number 20? So we'll review here. Let me tell you what happens. We have events at our school, like most schools. We have concerts and plays and so forth. It hardly ever fails when a parent doesn't come up to me and say, "Mr. Taylor, you know I have a daughter or a son in your class. You won't believe what's happening at home." I already know because they say this every year. They'll say, We can't even sit down and listen to the news anymore without my son or my daughter saying, let me tell you the principle behind that. Let me tell you there's a better way to do that. Let me tell you. We have great discussions in our home. And I'm just sitting there, That's what happens. And to see these young people who are old enough to understand these concepts, but they haven't quite been totally, what should we say, brainwashed, okay, or whatever. I love to teach that age group, 17, 18-year-old, and see them light up. And it's amazing because that is the destiny of our country. And I'm here to say we've got great young people coming up. And I will say this to you today with the founders, because they said it. I do not believe that the Creator, that God, helped to found this country only to let it end up on the ash heap of history. He has a plan. He has a plan. And the founders felt like they were doing something special. Now we're going to get into that, what they thought they were doing here in America. And you'll feel this. You'll feel it. Well, anyway, I hope each of you has been given one of these as you came in, right? 5,000-year lead. We're trying to flood the nation with this book. And even though you've been given one, it says on here 1995, if a person just buys one out there, it's $10. Or if you buy 10 or more, guess what? $5 a piece. See, we're trying to get it out. We're not making money on this. We're trying to get it out. A discussion of the 28 principles.